When you keep forgiving a narcissistic woman, something subtle but deeply destructive begins to unfold. She doesn't interpret your forgiveness as compassion, maturity, or emotional intelligence. She interprets it as permission. In her psychological framework, consistent forgiveness is not a sign of your goodness, it is a sign of your weakness. And once she identifies what she believes to be a weakness, she exploits it with precision. This is why every cycle of forgiveness doesn't heal the relationship, it emboldens her behavior. It teaches her that she can cross any line, deliver any insult, violate any emotional boundary, and still be welcomed back without consequence. Over time, this dynamic becomes predictable. She learns that your apologies come faster than her accountability. She learns that the emotional pain she causes will be erased the moment she tears up, plays the victim, or simply decides she wants attention again. In her mind, you become a resource, someone she can drain and return to at will. She begins to rely on your forgiveness as a tool to maintain power, because true power to a narcissist is not about love. It's about control. The real danger is not the single moment you forgive her, it's the pattern, because patterns teach, patterns reinforce, patterns build belief systems, hers and yours. She grows confident that you will always bend, and you grow accustomed to bending. She learns that consequences do not exist, and you slowly begin to forget that they should. And this is where the erosion begins. Not with loud explosions, but with quiet allowances. You think you're saving the relationship, but what you're really doing is sacrificing yourself one compromise at a time. Remember this: what you repeatedly forgive, you eventually teach someone to repeat. As you continue forgiving her, something far more dangerous happens beneath the surface. You begin to question yourself, not loudly, not immediately, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. Narcissistic dynamics rarely destroy you in one dramatic moment. They erode you through small psychological cuts that accumulate over time. Each time you excuse her cruelty, justify her disrespect, or convince yourself that she didn't mean it, you're not just protecting the relationship, you're redefining your self-worth. You start believing that maybe your feelings are excessive, maybe your needs are unreasonable, or maybe your pain is a price you must pay to keep the peace. This is where the slow collapse begins. Jung often spoke of the shadow, the part of ourselves we neglect or abandon. When you stay in these dynamics, your shadow becomes your self-respect. You push it further and further away until the version of yourself that once stood tall is replaced by someone who tolerates emotional harm as if it were normal. That shift is profound, because once you normalize disrespect, you unconsciously seek ways to justify staying in it. What you may not notice is how your internal dialogue changes. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and instead ask, "How can I avoid upsetting her?" You stop expressing your own needs and begin reorganizing your life around hers. Your world begins to revolve around her moods, her demands, her validation. And the more you orbit around her, the more disconnected you become from your own center. That disconnection is the real danger. When you lose sight of your worth, you lose the ability to protect it. And once you lose that ability, you are no longer in a relationship. You're in an emotional surrender. Never forget this: the moment you stop valuing yourself, the world becomes very comfortable undervaluing you too. As you continue forgiving her, something almost inevitable occurs. She evolves. Not in the direction of growth or self-awareness, but in the refinement of her manipulation. Narcissistic behavior is rarely static. It adapts. It studies you. It learns your emotional patterns, your guilt triggers, your empathy, your longing for harmony, and it uses all of it as psychological leverage. What once appeared as simple rudeness or selfishness begins to transform into more strategic forms of control. She becomes skilled at twisting reality just enough to keep you doubting your perceptions. And doubt, once introduced, becomes a powerful instrument in her hands. Gaslighting becomes more subtle. Instead of outright denial, she'll shift the narrative just slightly, enough to make you wonder if your memory is flawed or your reaction is exaggerated. Emotional guilt becomes more precise. She knows exactly what tone to use, what story to tell, what vulnerability to display in order to reset the cycle. Even silence becomes a tactic, withdrawal used to punish you until you fold back into compliance. This is not accidental. This is learned behavior reinforced through your repeated forgiveness. The more you explain yourself, the more she studies your explanations. The more you try to communicate, the more she learns how to weaponize your openness. Narcissistic individuals are highly perceptive, not in a compassionate sense, but in a predatory one. They observe the reactions their behavior produces. And when they find something effective, they amplify it. What makes this especially dangerous is that you don't notice the escalation. She doesn't become destructive overnight. She becomes more calculated, more subtle, more psychologically efficient. Her control becomes quieter, smoother, more elegant, almost invisible. And that invisibility is the real threat. Because what you cannot see, you cannot protect yourself from. Remember this. Once a narcissist learns how to control you, they rarely stop. They only learn how to do it better. As this pattern continues, something subtle but profoundly damaging begins to unfold. You stop enforcing your boundaries. Not because you don't have them, but because each time you forgive her, you subconsciously soften them. You start negotiating with yourself, telling yourself that it's not worth the fight, or maybe she'll change this time. But boundaries don't disappear in a dramatic collapse. They fade through repeated exceptions. Every time you overlook a disrespectful comment, tolerate a broken promise, or excuse an emotional outburst, you send a quiet message to yourself that your limits are optional. And the moment your limits become optional, they stop being limits at all. A narcissistic woman recognizes this immediately. She sees that your no can be bent, your discomfort can be ignored, and your needs can be delayed indefinitely. And once she learns this, she begins to expand her territory. What she once only pushed slightly, she now pushes with confidence. What she once questioned, she now demands. What she once apologized for, she now repeats without hesitation. In her mind, your boundaries are not rules. They are obstacles, and obstacles are meant to be removed. Psychologically, this is where you begin to lose your center. You become reactive rather than intentional. You start measuring your decisions not by what you need, but by what will keep the peace. Slowly, you stop asking yourself, what is right for me? And instead ask, what will keep her from exploding? That shift is the quiet birth of self-abandonment, and once you abandon yourself, the relationship is no longer a partnership. It becomes a psychological takeover. She leads, and you follow. She controls, and you adapt. She expands, and you shrink. Never forget this truth. When you stop protecting your boundaries, you stop protecting your life. As this cycle deepens, something even more profound begins to happen. You start losing yourself, not all at once and not in ways that are immediately obvious. It begins with small compromises. You silence your opinions to avoid conflict. You hide your frustrations because you don't want to be accused of being too sensitive. You stop pursuing certain interests because she mocks them or claims they take your attention away from her. Slowly, the space you once occupied in your own life becomes smaller and smaller. A narcissistic woman thrives on this psychological shrinking. The less connected you are to yourself, the easier you are to control. And what's especially tragic is that many people in these dynamics don't realize how much of themselves they've surrendered until they look back and barely recognize who they've become. You find yourself asking, when did I stop being that confident, grounded person? But the truth is, it didn't happen in one moment. It happened through countless small concessions made in the name of love, peace, or hope. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole. But in these relationships, the opposite occurs. Instead of integrating your strength, your voice, your intuition, you begin disowning them. You adapt to her moods. You absorb her criticisms. You internalize her version of reality. until eventually your identity is no longer self-created. It's shaped by her approval or her disappointment. This is the quiet tragedy of losing yourself. You don't just lose your joy or your confidence. You lose your direction. You stop dreaming. You stop growing. You stop believing you have a life outside her emotional orbit. But here's the truth you must confront. If someone can make you forget who you are, they were never meant to have that much power. Reclaim that power, because losing yourself is too high a price to pay for someone who never valued you in the first place. And this leads to the final, most devastating part of the cycle. After draining you, after reshaping your identity, after eroding your boundaries and confidence, she leaves. Not quietly, not respectfully, and certainly not with gratitude for everything you gave. She leaves as if none of it ever mattered. And the reason is painfully simple. A narcissistic woman doesn't form emotional bonds. She forms emotional attachments based on utility. Once the utility fades, once you're too depleted to provide what you once did, she begins to look elsewhere. To her, relationships are not built on connection, they're built on extraction. What makes this so destructive is that by the time she reaches this point, you are often at your weakest. You have invested your heart, your time, your energy, your identity into keeping the relationship alive. You believed that your forgiveness, your patience, your emotional sacrifices would eventually create stability. But in her psychological world, stability is boring. Predictability is uninteresting. And emotional loyalty is something she expects, not something she returns. So when she senses that you have nothing left to give, she disconnects, coldly, effortlessly, as if switching off a light, and this is the bad thing that happens. Not just the abandonment itself, but when it happens. She doesn't leave when you're strong. She leaves when you're broken. She leaves when you doubt yourself. She leaves when you need support the most. And in the aftermath, you're left questioning everything, your judgment, your value, your ability to trust again. But you must understand this. Her departure is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of her emptiness. What she takes is temporary. What you reclaim afterward is permanent. And here is the truth you must carry forward. The moment someone can walk away without looking back, you should stop looking back at them.